half a day, and welcome to Coffee with the Candidates. This series was created to educate and inform Guam's voting population on the positions candidates running for office take on some of the island's most controversial topics. Incumbent Senators Republican Mary Torres and Democrat Joe S. San Agustin are featured on this episode. Stay right there, as these candidates vying for your vote will soon share why you should give them your vote.
Good day, everyone. I'm Jeff Marcia, so welcome to Coffee with the Candidates. Sitting to my right is Senator Mary Torres. She joins us here, and we just want to say hello. Hi.
Half a day, Jeff. Good morning, and thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to be here, and I think this is a wonderful program that you've put on.
You know, Senator, I would ask you why you're running, but I think I know why you're running this time. Your work is not finished at the legislature, and you're introducing some important legislation that would protect mothers who, for whatever reason, are unable to care for their newborns. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
The bill that I'm working on presently that I hope to introduce in the next week or so is the Infant Safe Haven Act. And essentially it's a baby Moses law, which all 50 states already have, including Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. But it's intended to have a place and a refuge for mothers who would otherwise abandon their children or leave them to die. So it's a rescue type of bill for babies who are in that very dire sort of predicament.
Recently in the news, we reported on a couple of mothers who found themselves in some very difficult circumstances. Mm-hmm. And one mother is even being charged with murder through possible neglect. Another mother left her baby in a basket, kind of like Moses, outside of someone's home. Why is Guam so behind the eight ball when it comes to this kind of legislation?
I think that our culture never saw a need for that, because if you think about the network on Guam, the family network has always been very close. Many of us are aware within our own families of children that were reared by grandparents or aunts when their parents were unable, or even in today's society where a lot of military children are being reared or cared for by relatives or grandparents. So I think that was it, is where we now have more of a breakdown of that nuclear family or extended family support. We're going to see these sorts of things. But in decades past, perhaps that wasn't the situation. So I think it's just a sign of the times and how families are moving apart geographically. And also the climate is a little bit harder for people to perhaps to take care of their families, either for social, economic, or personal stressors. They're having a harder time. So we just have to, I think, adapt to those sorts of circumstances now.
Speaking of adapting, you've had some time to adapt in the legislature, and I know that you have some political heroes of your own. Who inspired you to run for senator?
Well, I have many within my family. Growing up, I had uncles who were senators. My father was a senator before he was a governor. My brother was a senator before he was. But I grew up in this climate of public service where we were always. I remember my father always saying, even when we were children, if you can help, just help, just do it. Don't wait for anybody to ask. Don't wait for an invitation. If you have something to give, give. And that was the very simplistic mind frame that I had. So with politics, a lot of people can serve in public office. The requirements to serve for public office are very simple: age, residency, citizenship. But the will to serve is a very different thing. It takes a different mindset, and it takes a different backbone to survive in the political arena. And I think I have that on top of other things.
What was your biggest surprise?
That things aren't so obvious. That you can have grand ideas and an agenda and a platform, but when you get in there, you're trying to educate a large population that maybe doesn't know about the subject matter, and you have to convince 14 other people that your policy call is correct. I thought that that was one of the challenges, because you think that things are so obvious, and then you find out that they're not. And so that was one of my biggest surprises. It was a rude awakening that there's a lot of prep work involved. You know, you really have to know the subject matter you're trying to push through, and you also have to be able to not fall apart when there's opposition that's thrown your way. I think that's one of the hardest things is, you know, your pride gets in the way, and just being able to bounce back from a punch is one of the hardest things in politics.
So has it toughened you?
It has. It has. Sometimes I don't appreciate, you know, the negativity. Sometimes I think that the criticism is unfounded and harsh. But, you know, it comes with the territory. And I think for me what it is I'm encouraged that people do express their opinions, because that to me is the best thing. If you can not only get people to express their opinions to you, but to carry the opinions of others, the voices of others, that otherwise wouldn't come out, I think that to me is really what it's about. So that's what I try to bring. I try to speak for others, and then I also welcome others, whether it's dissenting opinions, to add to the mix, because then it's fully vetted, I believe.
So as difficult as it's been, do you find yourself appreciating the unvarnished truth a little bit more? Because at least you know where a person stands on a particular issue, and they're not sugarcoating it and telling you one story but believing another.
Yeah, and I've had both. I've had people commit to voting, and then it doesn't happen that way on the floor, which, you know, but you're friends at the end of the day. No, I appreciate it entirely, and I also appreciate the role of a senator. I appreciate government. You know, I understand the roles of the three branches of government and how they interact, and as much as I can facilitate, you know, in keeping the structure of the legislature and the mission of the legislature whole, I'll continue down that role, because I believe in it. I believe that you have to have the body that writes the laws and is specific to writing the laws, and not worrying about anybody else's job but that.
We've had a lot of problems come to the surface in covering the budgeting process and finding lots of hidden nuggets, how money's been transferred, how money isn't going to where it's supposed to be going. And there are certain voices in the legislature have been rising up and saying, look, enough is enough. We have to be able to find not only where the money is going, but it really needs to stay in place. There's been a lot of raiding of what they call special lockbox funds, money that's not supposed to be touched, and is often protected by federal statute. What will you be doing in the 35th legislature to help end this practice?
What this speaker has started in the Office of Finance and Budget this year is they've tracked the accounts, and they've been trying very hard to get the reporting to be accurate and timely. The important thing in any process, I mean, we understand that with cash management, there's always that tendency to move monies around, and that's a prerogative of the governor through transfer authority. But insofar as special funds are concerned, if you have a system in place where funds are designated, the only way that you can ensure that things operate smoothly is if you follow the rules, right? Your self-imposed rules. And so I think going forward, what has to happen is the special funds need to be protected, because otherwise those projects that are aligned with them fall off the wayside. And oftentimes those little projects add up to the quality of life. You know, they're things that you shouldn't disregard, you know, over something else. So fiscal management and transparency is absolute in the next legislative term, because we are now dealing with a special pool, and that tendency to raid has to be controlled. You know, and unfortunately, there are very good intentions with setting up special funds, but we really, I think this legislative term, the next one coming up, we have to stay by our own rules. And you know, rules are necessary, otherwise the system falls apart. You know, if you're abusing it or taking advantage, or feeding one side and starving the other, you know, you're going to have a collapse. And we're seeing a lot of that now, where monies are being siphoned off and then, you know, some are left to dry.
One of the biggest complaints, you mentioned BJ, with him has been we've been hiring too much. We see a lot of special assistants in the governor's office, and now there's talk of even putting deputy directors on the chopping block. I don't know that getting rid of so many positions in the government is the answer. I don't know if that's the answer or not, but where would you see as a good opportunity to cut going into the 35th? Where do we need to shrink our budget?
We have to look at the efficiencies first of all. I mean, in anything, you can always do more with less. And when you're in a situation where you simply can't fund something, you know, it's inevitable that you're going to have to give something up. What we're very concerned about in this fragile economy is letting go of positions. But I believe that the government is too big. I believe we've outgrown ourselves. Our salaries are not sustainable with the increments that come with them year in and year out. You know, so I think, I'd mentioned this before in GMH, I think we're at that come to Jesus point where we have to understand that we need to shrink and certain services are going to have to go. I mean, it's inevitable. You either overtax people who the honest taxpayers who really are choking already. You either do that to save a government or you right-size a government. We talk about right-sizing all the time, but I think at some point we really have to just start whittling it away because like when we think about what happened with our neighboring islands when their economies crashed, they had no choice but to right-size. You know, where I believe in the CNMI, they cut as much as 2/3 of their budget at one point when they were really in their darkest days. With everything you just have to balance it. So we are gonna have to shrink the government in some ways.
Okay. Hey, thanks for your responses and thanks for spending some time with us.
You're welcome.
You're watching Coffee with the Candidates. We'll be back with more after the break. Hafa and welcome back to Coffee with the Candidates. I'm Jeff Marsh's show, and sitting to my right now is Joe S. San Agustin. Not Joe T, but Joe S. San Agustin.
That's correct, sir. And I'm happy to be back here at Source Media. This is great, and we have the Coffee of the Candidates. I'm glad to be here, Jeff.
Thanks for being here. Hey, listen, I really wanted to talk a little bit about your transition. My goodness, you went from the Board of Education as chairman, and then you made a large leap, a big leap into the legislature. And you've come out as a very tough senator when it comes to legislating tax legislation. And you're very honest. If you are under the impression that the legislature has made a mistake, you're all too willing to make a rollback. So I'd like to know what your analysis is. We just saw a sales tax repeal, okay? It's veto proof. Likely if it goes back to the legislature, if the caucus holds, we're gonna see a rollback of that sales tax before it takes effect October 1st. And yet, we just recently also saw an effort by one of your colleagues to roll back the liquid fuel tax, and it was narrowly defeated. Help us to understand why the senators were willing to roll back the sales tax, but not the liquid fuel, knowing what they've learned for some of these hidden or uncollected taxes by the administration and Rev and Tax.
Well, Jeff, when I looked at it, when we look at the sales tax, you remember that I introduced the sales tax bill. And then I was in support of the sales tax because the government was looking at reducing its services to the people of Guam. And that's one of the reasons why I ran for office and wanted to be a senator. Now being a senator, I want to make sure that the government maintains the service to the people of Guam. That's our responsibility, is to make sure public health is taken care of, GMH, education is being taken care of, and public safety. And then when we go to the liquid fuel tax, after I met with the public works folks, I found out that out of the $19 million that's generated from liquid fuel tax, only 3.5 is being used. So the first thing I thought was, wait a minute. I just supported the liquid fuel tax of a penny a half a year for the next 3 years that would generate about $3 to maybe $5 or $6 million. But there's still money in the liquid fuel tax, and why don't we just use the money that the people of Guam are paying for? And that's why, you remember, I voted to support the liquid fuel tax increase, but I turned around and said, wait a minute, no, they're not using the money the way they were supposed to be using it, so let's repeal it. But unfortunately, there was only 7 of us that supported the repeal.
And why do you think that is?
Well, I would say maybe I'm not going to say they're misinformed, or they're not, or maybe they are. I hate to say it that way because that's not fair to them. Because I do get involved with an agencies. Whenever I'm going to introduce any type of bill, I call the agency and I get involved in what's going on so that the bill has some bearing to it. You know, not just introduce it just to introduce it. No, there's got to be some meat to it. There's got to be some reason to the madness. Because right now the people of Guam are going to suffer this upcoming fiscal year of approximately $120 to $160 million shortfall. But if we don't find a way to reorganize the government of Guam, there's going to be reduction in services throughout the government.
Is government too big?
I would have to say it. I won't say it's too big, but it could get too big. Because when I say restructure, I'm not talking about eliminating employees in the government. I'm talking about that we need to take a look at, if you have a vacancy that's been sitting vacant for 2 years, you don't need it anymore. That's my belief. I did that when I was in the Board of Education. I do the same thing in Gov Guam White. Now, the same token, we need to go through attrition. You know, if you were retire, then we're not going to hire that position anymore because there are other folks that can move up and take that role. A very good example is, let's look at revenue and taxation. You got folks that have retired, institutional knowledge is gone, but there are folks there that have grown through the system. They can take over the supervisor position. Then you don't have to hire a supervisor. You don't have to hire the revenue agent 1 position. The 2 can pick up the slack. And we need to, I guess, take a look at what the legislature at one time was pushing, was performance-based budgeting. When you perform, then you get paid. And if you don't perform, then we need to move on.
If you're elected for the 35th, how do you see revenue collections changing with a new administration and its relationship with senators?
Well, right now, you know, everybody is talking about, everybody that's running for governor is talking about pushing more collection. My concern is that we need to first, number one, when we push for collection, we need to avoid or eliminate the opportunity for anybody to waive interest and penalties, other than the tax amnesty. Stop the waiving of penalties. I mean, when I was a compliance supervisor at Revenue and Tax, we would issue citations, fines, about $2,000 per business, and then all of a sudden it would get waived, and I'm like, why are you waiving it? These folks have failed to renew their business license, or they're conducting business without a license, and it involves laws that states specifically that we are to fine them. So we issue the fine, and then all of a sudden it's waived. The bureaucracy is just, we need to pause and say, Gov Guam, do your part. The people of Guam are paying taxes for this, are expecting this, so we need to do our part. And on the legislature side, we need to, maybe some folks have said that when we introduce bills and we say that these are special funds, if anybody touches it, the governor touches it, or any of the legislature wants to introduce a bill to move money away, there needs to be a penalty for that. There needs to be a restriction. If we say that liquid fuel tax is for repairing of roads, we need to take UOG out of the net, GCC out of the net, and let's find another funding source for UOG and DOE or GCC. And the reason why I say that is because in the liquid fuel tax, about $750,000 goes to UOG, $250 goes to GCC. We need to find another funding source for that and let liquid fuel tax do what it's supposed to do. I'll give you another example, Jeff. We all pay for a streetlight fund. I've asked GPA this, the folks in management says, why are the places so dark throughout the island? Why aren't there street lights at every intersection? Why aren't there a street light at every bus stop? They said, we're only collecting what lights are on. I said, wait, you're getting me confused. It's about $3 or $4 million that the people of Guam pay when you register a vehicle. I said, you're not getting all that money? He says, no, because if the street light's not on, then we don't collect a bill for it. The people of Guam pay when they register their vehicle for a streetlight fund. The streets should be lit. There's been too many accidents on the back road, down south. It's too dark. Why is that? Because of that reason. There's supposedly a memorandum of understanding with the mayor's office and the Public Works and GPA that you identify where you want the street lights, and that's where they'll turn it on, then they'll bill the government of Guam. For me, I don't believe in that. It should be Public Works, and if anything, Highway Safety and GPA. Identify where we need the streetlights, turn them on. The people of Guam are paying for that. No different as you've seen recently, I wrote a letter to Public Works asking them, why are our streets not marked? After I wrote that letter and went with a press release on that one, we had a lot of folks going out there marking the roads. That should not be the reaction of that department. That department should be out there. They should be marking all the roads. I mean, if you drive at night, you have folks that are just cross lanes, not realizing that they're crossing lanes, and the only reason to do that because there's no markings on the road. I mean, we as the federal government, give us grants to repair our roads. We have money. Let's repair our roads. Let's not make the excuse no more. Let's just do it. We've recently, I would say maybe 2 years ago, they gave tax breaks to businesses to repair Hamburger Road. It was done. Then let's take a look at other roads. And if we need to give a tax break so we can get roads fixed, then let's do it. But before we get to that, let's make sure that the liquid fuel tax is being used for what it was intended. Not to pay for, what's that, you have the mass transit. Let's take a look at a public-private partnership, and let's get that on the road, and let's get that to success.
Senator, within these last 2 minutes, can you tell us what you would propose, not just to give revenue enhancements for FY19, but to bring new revenue to Guam? We don't hear a lot of talk within the legislature about incentives to bring new businesses to Guam, so there's more money, there's a bigger pie to draw from.
Well, number one, we need to take a look at, before we talk about bringing new money, let's take a look at, we have the QC that's involved in Guam. We have a lot of QCs out there. I honestly believe that if you were a business and you receive a QC for the past 10 or 20 years, it ends when that QC ends. That you will never get a renewal.
But so we're getting a free buy. And it keeps going, right?
And it keeps going. It's almost automatic that any business that has a QC would get a renewal every 10 years. So that's, I don't know, I look at it this way. If you have the money to open a business, you have the money to pay the taxes. And we need to remind ourselves when I say that is that the Tax Reform Jobs Act specifically gave a break to every business on Guam. 33%, everybody has reduced. They're not paying as much as they were paying the year before. And next year, we're gonna find that they're gonna get an injection of their own money. And it's no different as that we have the 5% BBT. Some folks ask me, says, why would you wanna maintain that? Do you honestly believe that any of the businesses on Guam are gonna reduce their costs? No. And a couple of senators approached me and said, well, Senator, why don't we just allow the business to take advantage of that 1% and they can help their business? They're getting the break already from the Trump Act.
Up to 40% deduction.
Exactly. So we need them. I honestly believe we can maintain the 5%, and we start using that money for what it was intended for. It was supposed to be used. A percentage of that, if the sales tax went by, would have been for GMH and DOE. GMH needs help. But when we looked at all the hearings we've had, and I'm part of the investigation committee, we're going to find out exactly where the true leakage is at. We know that folks are going to say it's compact impact. Let's stop. Let's have a true accountability, because my understanding from the Department of Interior is that only DOE has a true accountability of the impact of the compact impact.
Senator, you're just like me. I could talk about this stuff forever. We only have so much time.
Yes, sir.
But I'm sure we're going to give you some more opportunity to talk with us on PNC News First.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for joining us with Coffee with the Candidates. I'm Jeff Marchessault. We appreciate your time.